I want a divorce.
You planned this.
Rebecca, is that really you? You have the wrong person.
They copied your engineering seal. Only once? No. This happened repeatedly.
Fred Russell was 42, a structural engineer who spent more time inspecting aging bridges across Illinois than talking about himself. Most people believed he was an ordinary husband, living in the shadow of his polished, ambitious wife, Natalia. He drove the same old Ford Explorer, carried a worn leather notebook, and never raised his voice. What they didn't know was that Fred remembered every detail that others overlooked. So when Natalia invited him to an anniversary dinner only to slide divorce papers across the table, he stayed perfectly still. Then the waitress looked at Natalia. Her smile vanished, and she whispered, "Rebecca, is that really you? If you're watching from somewhere in the world, let me know your country and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories travel. And if you love slow-burning mysteries, satisfying twists, and stories where truth wins over deception, consider subscribing. Tomorrow's story might become your next favorite. The waitress stood frozen for barely 2 seconds. It wasn't long enough for anyone else in the dining room to notice, but it was long enough for Fred Russell. He had spent nearly 20 years inspecting concrete cracks no wider than a fingernail. Bridges failed because engineers ignored tiny details. Marriages probably did too. I'm sorry," the waitress said, forcing a nervous smile. "I thought you were someone else." Natalia answered before Fred could say a word. "It happens all the time." Her laugh sounded polished, too polished. She lifted her wine glass with perfect timing, taking a sip before anyone could study her face. Fred watched the movement instead of the words. The stem of the crystal glass trembled against her fingers, only slightly. Most people would never have noticed. He did. The waitress hesitated. "No, I could have sworn," Natalia interrupted again. "I've never been here before." The waitress blinked. "I'm sorry, ma'am." She glanced at Fred, embarrassed. "I really thought—" "It's all right," Fred said quietly. His voice was calm, gentle. The waitress nodded and walked away toward the kitchen. Natalia waited until the woman disappeared before placing both hands on the divorce packet. "Can we stay focused?" Fred looked down at the stack of documents. 43 pages, prepared by Dalton and Pierce Family Law. Everything was tabbed, highlighted, organized. Someone had invested hours assembling them, maybe weeks. The leather folder still smelled new. Natalia folded her arms. "I'd appreciate it if you signed tonight." Fred didn't answer immediately. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Michigan Avenue glowed beneath rows of summer lights. Taxis rolled past the Langham Hotel. Tourists crossed the Chicago River Bridge carrying shopping bags. Life continued. Inside the restaurant, someone laughed at the bar. A waiter uncorked another bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet. Soft piano music floated across the room. Nothing looked unusual. Only their table felt disconnected from the rest of the city. Fred opened the first page, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. His eyes moved steadily from line to line. Natalia shifted in her chair. "You don't need to read every page." "I usually do. It's standard paperwork. So are bridge blueprints." She sighed. "This isn't a construction project." "No." He turned another page. "It's more important." Silence settled between them. Fred continued reading. The petition claimed their marriage had suffered irreconcilable differences. Nothing unusual. The next section listed assets. The downtown condominium, Natalia's Lexus RX, his Ford Explorer, retirement accounts, savings, investment portfolios. Fred slowed. There was an investment account ending in 9147. He had never seen it before. He continued reading without changing expression. Another page. A consulting income listed under Natalia. Nearly $240,000 over the previous 3 years. He frowned almost invisibly. Natalia worked as a regional marketing executive, consulting. She had never mentioned consulting. He kept reading. Another company, another income source, another unfamiliar account. He closed the folder. I'll need time. Natalia leaned forward. There isn't anything complicated. There are accounts I don't recognize. They're mine. I've never seen them on our tax returns. They were handled separately. Fred studied her. Her answer arrived too quickly, almost rehearsed. She crossed one leg over the other, a gesture she used during difficult conversations. He remembered the same posture from years ago when she explained why she'd missed his birthday dinner because of an unexpected business meeting. Another time when she claimed her phone battery had died during an entire weekend conference. At the time, he had accepted every explanation. Tonight, those memories quietly returned. Not accusations, just observations. Natalia softened her tone. Fred, I'm not trying to fight. I know. I just think dragging this out will hurt both of us. Fred nodded slowly. Maybe. She reached across the table. I'll be fair. He looked at her hand resting beside his. The wedding ring was still there. Perfectly polished. She hadn't removed it. Not yet. Why tonight? He asked. What do you mean? You could have mailed these. I wanted to be respectful. He met her eyes. Respectful would have been telling me before hiring attorneys. For the first time that evening, Natalia didn't answer immediately. The silence lasted only 3 seconds. But Fred counted them anyway. I didn't think you'd make this easy. I still might. She stared at him, uncertain whether he'd just agreed with her or warned her. The waiter arrived carrying their entrees. Grilled filet mignon, roasted asparagus, garlic mashed potatoes. Neither of them touched the food. The waiter sensed the tension. Can I get either of you anything else? No, Natalia answered. Fred smiled politely. We're fine. The waiter disappeared. Natalia pushed the folder slightly closer. If we finish this tonight, lawyers won't drag everything through court. Fred opened the packet again. The final pages listed financial disclosures. He noticed something else. The formatting changed halfway through. Some pages had clearly been prepared by different software. Different fonts. Different margins. Different numbering style. Most people wouldn't care. Engineers noticed consistency. Inconsistency stood out. His thumb stopped on a signature page. Natalia had already signed. 3 days earlier. So had her attorney. She had invited him to dinner after everything was already finalized. The dinner had never been a conversation. It had been a presentation. He gently closed the folder once more. I won't sign tonight. Natalia's expression hardened. You don't trust me, Fred answered honestly. I don't have enough information. She leaned back, disappointment carefully arranged across her face. I expected that. No. He shook his head once. You expected me to sign? Neither spoke. The pianist began playing Moon River. An older couple at the next table toasted 40 years of marriage. Fred noticed the husband adjusting his wife's shawl before she even realized it had slipped. Small things mattered. They always had. Across the dining room, the same waitress emerged from the kitchen carrying another tray. As she passed their table, she looked toward Natalia again. This time she didn't stop, but her eyes widened for just an instant. Recognition. Not uncertainty. Recognition. Fred watched until she disappeared around the corner. Natalia pretended not to notice. She reached for her purse. If this is your decision, have your attorney contact mine. I will. She stood. So that's it. I suppose it is. She picked up her coat. I'll have someone collect the rest of your things after the paperwork is finished. Our things, Fred corrected quietly. She didn't respond. She walked toward the exit with measured confidence. Halfway across the dining room, she briefly looked toward the kitchen entrance. Only once, only for a heartbeat. Then she left. Fred remained seated. The untouched steak had already begun to cool. He slowly placed every page back into the leather folder. Not a single document remained out of order. He paid the check, added a generous tip, then stood. As he walked toward the front entrance, he noticed the waitress near the hostess stand. She recognized him immediately. "I'm really sorry about earlier," she said softly. "You have nothing to apologize for." "I embarrassed your wife." Fred paused. "What made you think you knew her?" The waitress frowned. "I wish I could remember." "You seemed certain." "I was." She looked toward the street where Natalia's Lexus had already disappeared into traffic. "I don't know why." She pressed 2 fingers against her temple. "But that face? I've definitely seen it before." Fred nodded. "Thank you." He stepped outside into the warm Chicago night. The river reflected thousands of city lights. Traffic hummed beneath the bridges he had helped repair years earlier. He unlocked his aging Ford Explorer. Before starting the engine, he reached into the center console and removed the small leather notebook he carried everywhere. He opened to a blank page. Only one word was written: Rebecca. He underlined it once, closed the notebook. And for the first time since the dinner began, Fred realized he wasn't thinking about the divorce anymore. He was thinking about a name that wasn't supposed to exist. Fred Russell arrived home just after 9. The condominium overlooking Lakeshore Drive felt unfamiliar, despite being the place he had lived for nearly 11 years. Natalia's coat was gone from the hallway closet. Her favorite coffee mug was missing from the kitchen counter. The bedroom door stood half open, revealing several empty spaces in the walk-in closet. She had not decided to leave that evening. She had been leaving for weeks. Fred placed the leather folder containing the divorce papers on the dining table. Beside it, he laid his weathered notebook. He removed his wristwatch, loosened his tie, and poured himself a glass of water instead of the bourbon that remained untouched in the cabinet. Emotion could wait. Facts came first. He opened his laptop and signed into the online banking portal. The first account showed nothing unusual. Their joint checking account reflected mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery purchases, and his direct deposits from the Illinois Department of Transportation. He moved to the savings account, still ordinary. Then he opened the archived statements. Fred always downloaded PDF copies at the end of every month. It was an old habit from his first engineering supervisor, who believed digital records should never exist in only one place. "Computers fail," the man used to say. "Paper remembers." Fred had followed that advice for nearly 20 years. He created a new folder on his desktop. He named it simply Review. No dramatic titles, no assumptions, just a place to collect information. He started with the oldest statements from 4 years earlier. Nothing. Then 3 years. Still nothing obvious. But engineers rarely searched for obvious failures. A bridge rarely collapsed because of one massive crack. It failed because hundreds of tiny changes accumulated until the structure could no longer carry its own weight. Financial records worked the same way. Fred exported every transaction into a spreadsheet. He sorted them by amount. Nothing. Then by merchant. Still nothing. Finally, he sorted them by frequency. One name appeared again and again. Horizon Civic Consulting, LLC. The payments were small. $480, $620, $995, $840. Never large enough to attract immediate attention. Never regular enough to resemble a salary. Over 3 years, however, the total exceeded $118,000. Fred leaned back. Natalia had never mentioned Horizon Civic Consulting. Not once. He opened the tax returns stored on an external drive. The company wasn't listed as her employer. That wasn't unusual if it had been independent consulting work. What bothered him was something else. The payments always arrived on Tuesday mornings, between 8:15 and 8:40. Almost every month, predictable. Deliberate? He highlighted every transaction in yellow. Then he checked another account, a brokerage account. Most of the investments belonged to index funds they had purchased together years ago. But there was one additional account ending in 9147, the same account number listed in the divorce paperwork. Fred clicked it. Access denied. The account existed. He simply lacked authorization to view it. He stared at the screen for several seconds. Married couples often maintained separate investments. That alone proved nothing. But why had it never appeared during tax preparation? He opened the last 3 years of federal returns. Schedule B, Schedule D, capital gains, dividend income. He read every page. Nothing matched the account listed in the divorce packet. He reached for his notebook. One line became 3. Rebecca, Horizon Civic Consulting, account 9147. No conclusions, only observations. At 6 the following morning, Fred arrived at the construction site of the Harrison Street Bridge Rehabilitation Project. The July sun had barely risen over Chicago. Concrete dust floated through the air while cranes lifted steel girders into place. His assistant, Kevin Morales, waved from the inspection trailer. "Morning, Fred." "Morning. You look like you slept 2 hours." "I might have." Kevin laughed. "Coffee." "Already had one." Fred spent the next 4 hours inspecting expansion joints and reviewing weld reports. Work had always provided clarity. Steel either met specification or it didn't. Concrete either passed compression tests or it failed. There were no emotional arguments with mathematics. Around noon, he returned to his office overlooking the site. His phone buzzed. Margaret Sullivan. He answered immediately. "I reviewed the documents you emailed," the attorney said. "What do you think?" "I think you were right not to sign." Fred waited. Margaret continued. "The financial disclosure raises several questions, such as, there are assets identified without supporting documentation. I noticed. And there are income sources that don't appear consistent with your joint tax filings." Fred looked through the office window toward workers securing temporary supports beneath the bridge deck. "What should I do?" "For now, yes. Nothing that alerts your wife." Fred remained silent. "I mean that literally," Margaret added. "Don't accuse her. Don't ask about the accounts. Don't mention the waitress. Don't change passwords yet unless security requires it." "You think this is bigger than a divorce?" "I don't know what it is." She paused. "But I know incomplete information leads people to make expensive mistakes." Fred appreciated attorneys who sounded like engineers. "What would you recommend?" "I'd like you to gather every financial record you possess." "I already started." "How organized are you?" "I have statements going back almost 10 years. Margaret chuckled softly. "I was hoping you'd say that." "I also have tax returns, insurance files, property records, and archived emails." "Excellent. There is one company I don't recognize. Horizon Civic Consulting. You already saw it. It appears repeatedly." Margaret typed something. "I'll have my office research it this afternoon." "I did a quick search. And I couldn't find much." "Leave that to us. Quick searches aren't enough." Fred thanked her and ended the call. That evening, he drove to the Harold Washington Library instead of going home. The research databases available through the public library included business records not always visible through ordinary search engines. He logged into the Illinois Corporate Registry. Horizon Civic Consulting, LLC. No active listing. He searched again. Nothing. He removed consulting. Still nothing. He tried Horizon Civic. Nothing. His eyes narrowed. He entered the company name exactly as it appeared on the bank statements. Again, no results. That shouldn't have been possible. Companies receiving regular electronic payments normally existed somewhere within state registration databases, unless... The thought stopped there. Fred refused to finish it. Assumptions created blind spots. Evidence eliminated them. He printed the search results showing no registered company. Then he searched neighboring states. Wisconsin, Indiana, Missouri, Michigan, nothing. Not a single registered entity matched the name appearing on years of financial transfers. The librarian walked past. "Finding everything you need." "I found something." She smiled. "Good." Fred looked back at the empty search results. "No," he murmured to himself. "I found nothing." And somehow that was far more troubling. He folded the printed pages into his notebook. As he stepped outside, his phone vibrated again. A new email had arrived from Margaret Sullivan. Subject: "I've located someone who may be able to help." Inside were only 2 sentences. "His name is Ryan Cooper. He's the best licensed private investigator I've worked with." Fred read the message twice before locking his phone. Across the street, evening traffic rolled steadily beneath the city lights. For the first time since the waitress had spoken a stranger's name, Fred realized the mystery was no longer centered on his marriage. It was centered on a company that appeared to receive thousands of dollars every year, without existing at all. Ryan Cooper's office occupied the 3rd floor of a century-old brick building in Chicago's West Loop. There was no polished reception desk. No framed awards, only a frosted glass door with black lettering that read, "Cooper Investigations." Fred arrived 5 minutes early. He always did. Ryan opened the door himself. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered with short gray hair, and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades watching people who believed they weren't being watched. "You must be Fred Russell." "I am." Ryan extended a firm handshake. "Margaret speaks highly of you." "I hope that's a good thing. It means you keep records." Fred offered a faint smile. "I try." Ryan led him into a modest office overlooking Randolph Street. A large whiteboard covered one wall. Maps of Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana hung beside it. Metal filing cabinets lined another wall, each labeled with case numbers instead of names. Ryan motioned toward a chair. "Start from the beginning." Fred didn't dramatize the story. He described the dinner, the divorce papers, the unfamiliar investment accounts, the consulting company, the waitress. Most importantly, he repeated the exact sentence she had spoken. "Rebecca, is that really you?" Ryan wrote only one word on a legal pad. "Rebecca." "Anything else?" Ryan asked. She looked frightened. "Your wife?" "For about 2 seconds. And after that, she recovered." Ryan nodded slowly. People can fake surprise. They can't usually fake instinct. Fred leaned forward. "I don't think the waitress made a random mistake." "Nothing." "I don't either." Ryan opened a laptop connected to several commercial investigative databases unavailable to the public. "Let's begin with the simplest question." He typed Rebecca Hayes. Thousands of records appeared. Too broad. He narrowed the search. Female. Estimated age between 35 and 45. Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Minnesota. The list shrank dramatically. Ryan studied the screen. There. He clicked one record, Rebecca Ann Hayes, born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Age 39. Previous address in Milwaukee. Another address in Naperville, Illinois. Business registration filed 8 years earlier. The driver's license photograph slowly loaded. Fred didn't speak. He didn't have to. The woman staring back from the monitor looked almost identical to Natalia. The hairstyle was different. The hair color was darker. The makeup was lighter. But the eyes, the jawline, the small scar near the left eyebrow, impossible to mistake. Ryan turned toward him. "You've seen this woman before." Fred answered quietly. "I've been married to her for 11 years. Ryan didn't react with surprise. Instead, he enlarged the photograph. The software estimates a 94% facial similarity. Fred continued studying the image. It wasn't merely resemblance, it was Natalia. Several minutes passed before Ryan spoke again. This doesn't automatically mean your wife committed a crime. I know. People legally change names. I know. They remarry. They relocate. They rebuild their lives. Fred nodded. But they usually tell their husband. Ryan gave the slightest smile. Usually. He continued reading the file. Interesting. What is it? Rebecca Hayes appears to disappear 7 years ago. What do you mean? No death certificate. No legal name change that I can immediately find. No employment records. No recent tax filings. It's as if she simply stopped existing. Fred remained silent. Ryan opened another database. Vehicle registrations, property ownership, business licenses. The results became stranger. Rebecca Hayes had once been associated with a small consulting business headquartered in Milwaukee. Its registration had expired years earlier. The business name was unfamiliar, but one officer's name immediately caught Ryan's attention. Jason Whitmore. Ryan clicked the profile. Investment consultant. Chicago? Several limited liability companies. Multiple commercial real estate holdings. Well-connected. No criminal convictions. No public lawsuits. On paper, he looked successful. Ryan printed several pages. I'm more interested in him now. Then Rebecca. They may be connected. Fred watched Ryan pin Jason Whitmore's photograph to the whiteboard. Beside it went Rebecca Hayes. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Ryan added a recent social media photograph of Natalia Russell. The similarities were unmistakable. Ryan folded his arms. I'd like to run surveillance. On Jason. On both. Fred looked out the window. Cars moved steadily along the street below. People hurried toward restaurants and offices. None of them realized how quickly an ordinary life could become something unrecognizable. How long? A few days. Will they notice? Ryan smiled. If they notice me, I should retire. 3 mornings later, Fred returned to work inspecting support beams beneath the Harrison Street Bridge. His phone vibrated just after 11. Ryan. I've got something. Fred stepped away from the construction crew. What happened? Your wife canceled 3 meetings yesterday. So, she told coworkers she was attending a marketing conference. Fred waited. There wasn't one. Where did she go? A hotel. Ryan named it. The Palmer House Hilton in downtown Chicago. Fred knew the hotel. Large, historic, crowded, perfect for disappearing into a crowd. Was she alone? No, Ryan's voice remained calm. A man arrived 14 minutes later. Jason. Yes. Fred closed his eyes for only a second. He wasn't angry, not yet. He wanted facts. What did they do? They met in the lobby. They embraced. No? Hands? No. Anything personal, nothing obvious. Ryan paused. They acted like business partners. Fred frowned. Business partners. They exchanged folders. What kind? Large document envelopes. They spoke for about 30 minutes. Could you hear them? No. The lobby was too crowded. What happened next? They entered a private conference room reserved under Jason Whitmore's company. Fred remained quiet. Ryan continued. They stayed inside for nearly 2 hours. When they came out, they each carried different folders. Fred looked across the bridge site. A crane operator slowly lowered a 20-foot steel beam into position. Every movement was deliberate, measured. No one rushed. Anything else? Fred asked. There was one detail. What? Your wife checked the hallway twice before entering the conference room. As if she expected someone. Or feared someone. Ryan emailed several surveillance photographs. Fred opened them. The first showed Natalia exiting her Lexus. The second showed Jason arriving. The third captured the exact moment they exchanged document envelopes. Neither smiled. Neither embraced. Neither behaved like lovers. They behaved like people conducting business they didn't want interrupted. Ryan spoke again. I think this is bigger than infidelity. I was beginning to think the same. I'd like another week. For surveillance? Yes. Fred didn't hesitate. Do it? Before ending the call, Ryan added one final sentence. I've also started looking into Horizon Civic Consulting. Find anything? Not yet. But companies don't vanish. No. They're hidden. Fred slipped the phone back into his pocket. Hours later, after finishing the bridge inspection, another email arrived from Ryan. Attached were enlarged photographs from outside the hotel. Fred zoomed in on one image. Jason's document envelope had not been completely sealed. A single sheet of paper protruded slightly from the top. Only a few words were visible. Most were blurred. One line, however, remained perfectly clear. Engineering certification. Fred stared at the photograph until the words stopped looking real. He had never worked with Jason Whitmore. He had never heard of Horizon Civic Consulting before the divorce papers, yet somehow, engineering documents were already moving between Jason and Natalia behind closed doors. And Fred had the growing feeling that his own profession was about to become part of a much larger deception. Fred spent the next morning reviewing every engineering report he had signed during the previous 5 years. His office at the Illinois Department of Transportation overlooked the Harrison Street Bridge project. Steel cables stretched across the river, while barges moved slowly beneath the temporary work platforms. Normally, the familiar rhythm of construction settled his mind. Today, it only sharpened his questions. Every engineering certification carried his digital signature. Every inspection report passed through a secure authentication system before it reached contractors. Forging one by hand was difficult. Duplicating a certified digital signature was another matter entirely. He logged into the department's document archive. Each approved project appeared exactly where it should. Nothing had been altered. Nothing had been deleted. If someone had used his credentials, they hadn't done it inside the state system. That realization narrowed the possibilities. Someone had copied his signature outside the official network. His office phone rang. It was Ryan. I've got another name for you. Fred closed the document he had been studying. I'm listening. I spent yesterday digging into Jason Whitmore. And on the surface, he's exactly what you'd expect. Ryan spoke with the measured tone of someone reading facts rather than telling a story. 46 years old, MBA from Northwestern, licensed investment advisor, board member for 2 nonprofit organizations, regular speaker at business conferences. Sounds clean. He does. Ryan paused. But clean people don't usually operate through 7 different LLCs. Fred reached for his notebook. 7. Officially. Ryan read them one by one. Whitmore Capital Advisors, Lakefront Strategic Holdings, Blue Summit Equity, North Harbor Development, Prairie Vista Management, Elm Ridge Ventures, and Horizon Civic Consulting. Fred underlined the last name. So Horizon exists, Ryan answered carefully. Sort of. What does that mean? It exists on paper. But it has no employees, no office, no active website, no listed phone number, no public contracts, no business activity that generates visible revenue. Fred stared at the bridge outside his office. So why move money through it? That's exactly the question. Ryan continued. I pulled commercial property records. Horizon leases a small office suite near O'Hare. Occupied. I visited yesterday. And the lights were off. No furniture. No receptionist. Just an empty room with a locked mailbox. Fred wrote another note. Shell Company. He disliked the phrase. It sounded theatrical. He preferred descriptions. A company that existed legally, but appeared to conduct no actual business. Ryan spoke again. I also found something connected to your wife. Fred waited. 3 years ago, Natalia attended a business conference in Denver. She told me about it. There was no conference. Fred didn't respond. The hotel confirmed Jason Whitmore reserved 2 meeting rooms that same weekend. Fred closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered that trip. Natalia had returned with gifts from the airport. A Denver Broncos coffee mug, chocolate from a local shop, souvenirs, evidence designed to support a story. Ryan broke the silence. I'm not telling you they were having an affair. I understand. I'm telling you they've been working together much longer than you realized. Fred thanked him and ended the call. He didn't sit for long. Instead, he opened his personal archive. Unlike most engineers, Fred stored every completed project on encrypted external drives after receiving permission from the department. He believed finished work should remain accessible long after computers became obsolete. A habit that once seemed excessive suddenly became valuable. He searched for every bridge inspection completed within the past 4 years. Hundreds appeared. He narrowed the list. Projects involving private consulting firms. 23 remained. He opened the first report. Nothing unusual. Second report. Nothing. Third. Still nothing. Hours passed. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the Chicago River. Workers changed shifts. Construction continued. Fred barely noticed. Near 5 o'clock, he opened a report concerning a municipal parking structure renovation completed 18 months earlier. The report itself looked authentic. His signature appeared exactly where expected. The certification number matched. Then he noticed something almost invisible. The spacing beneath his signature line differed by less than a quarter inch. He opened the original file stored on his archive drive. The spacing was normal. He placed both documents side by side. Everything matched, except one page, the certification page. Someone had extracted his signature and inserted it into another document. The forgery was nearly perfect. Nearly. Only the formatting betrayed it. Fred checked another report. Same problem. Then another. Again. His pulse remained steady, but he no longer doubted what he was seeing. Someone had built official-looking engineering certifications using pieces of authentic reports. His phone vibrated again. Margaret Sullivan. I was about to call you, she said. I found something. So did I. You first. Fred explained the altered certification pages. Margaret remained quiet until he finished. Don't send those electronically. I wasn't planning to. I'll have them examined by a forensic document specialist. I also spoke with Ryan. I already have his report. Margaret's voice became firmer. Fred, listen carefully. I'm listening. If forged engineering certifications were used in financial transactions, this is no longer just a divorce issue. I assumed as much. It could become a criminal investigation. Fred looked once more at the altered reports. I never approved these. I know. But we'll need to prove that. She paused. Can you account for every digital certificate issued in your name? I think so. Think. I'll know by tomorrow. Margaret didn't rush him. Good. Before hanging up, she added one more instruction. Back up everything. I already have. In more than one place. Fred almost smiled. I learned that a long time ago. That evening, he stopped by his bank. Inside the safe deposit box rested several encrypted drives containing years of archived engineering records. He added fresh copies, then locked the box. The branch manager recognized him. Working late again, Mr. Russell. Just organizing paperwork. She laughed. My husband says paperwork never ends. Fred smiled politely. No, it doesn't. As he left the bank, his phone displayed a new email from Ryan. Subject: photographs. Fred opened the attachment while sitting inside his Explorer. The images showed Jason Whitmore entering another office building earlier that afternoon. Nothing unusual. Until the final photograph. Jason wasn't carrying the brown document envelope anymore. He was carrying a blue architectural tube, the kind engineers used for oversized construction drawings. Fred enlarged the image. A white shipping label remained partially visible. Most of the address was blurred. One line could still be read: Russell Engineering Certification Package. Fred stared at the words. His own surname, printed on a package in Jason Whitmore's hands. His heartbeat remained controlled, but his mind reached a conclusion it refused to accept without evidence. Someone wasn't merely using his professional identity. Someone had assembled complete engineering certification packages under his name. And if those documents had already entered public construction projects, the consequences extended far beyond his marriage. For the first time since the waitress had spoken the name, Rebecca Fred realized the people behind this deception hadn't simply stolen money. They had borrowed his reputation, and that was something he intended to take back. Fred slept for less than 4 hours, not because anxiety kept him awake, because organization did. By 5:30 the next morning, his dining table had become a temporary evidence station. Every document was sorted into labeled folders: bank statements, engineering records, tax returns, corporate searches, photographs, emails. His notebook sat in the center. Unlike the growing stacks of paper surrounding it, the notebook contained only short entries: Rebecca, Horizon, Jason, certification package. Questions came before conclusions. That habit had carried him through countless bridge inspections. It would guide him now. At 8 o'clock, he walked into Linda Foster's office. Margaret Sullivan had arranged the meeting the previous evening. Linda was one of Chicago's most respected forensic accountants. Her office overlooked the Chicago Board of Trade building, though she seemed to pay little attention to the impressive view. Instead, every wall displayed financial flowcharts from previous investigations. Colored strings connected companies, bank accounts, dates, transactions, patterns. She greeted Fred with a firm handshake. Margaret tells me you're unusually organized. I try. I hope you brought everything. Fred placed 2 storage boxes on the conference table. I brought copies. Linda smiled. I already like you. She opened the first box. No originals. The originals stay somewhere else. Excellent. She removed several bank statements. You'd be surprised how many intelligent people walk into my office carrying the only copy they own. Fred remained quiet. Linda appreciated silence. She began arranging statements across the table. You've already identified Horizon Civic Consulting. Yes. And several unfamiliar investment accounts. Correct. What else? I think someone copied my engineering certifications. Linda looked up. Think. I found formatting differences. Good. You didn't say they were forged. I don't have enough proof. Linda nodded approvingly. That's exactly why Margaret asked me to help. She turned her computer monitor toward him. I'm not looking for fraud. What are you looking for? Patterns. She imported 3 years of transaction data into specialized accounting software. Within seconds, hundreds of colored lines appeared. Money flowed from one account into another. Some lines remained isolated. Others formed clusters. Linda enlarged one section. There? Fred leaned closer. What am I looking at? Horizon receives money. I know. It rarely keeps it. The software highlighted outgoing transfers. Within 48 hours of receiving deposits, Horizon transferred nearly every dollar elsewhere, sometimes to Lakefront Strategic Holdings, sometimes to Prairie Vista Management, occasionally to North Harbor Development, Jason Whitmore's companies. Linda clicked another button. A timeline appeared. Every transaction aligned with surprising precision. The money barely stays in Horizon. How long? Average of 36 hours. Fred studied the timeline. So Horizon acts like a pass-through. Exactly. She highlighted another sequence. And this is even more interesting. What is it? The transfer amounts. He noticed they rarely exceeded $10,000. Most fell between $7,000 and $9,000. Linda folded her arms. Someone worked very hard to avoid attracting attention. Fred remembered his earlier observation. The payments are always below reporting thresholds. Linda looked at him. You noticed. I noticed repetition. Good. She smiled slightly. Numbers always tell the truth. Her assistant entered carrying fresh coffee. Linda thanked her before returning to the screen. Let's see who pays Horizon. More names appeared. Several private investors, small development companies, consulting fees, construction management payments. Most looked ordinary, until one transaction caught Fred's attention. Illinois Municipal Infrastructure Alliance. I've heard of them. Linda clicked the entry. They paid Horizon $68,000. For what? No description. Fred frowned. That's unusual. Very. She searched public procurement records. No contract, no consulting agreement, no listed vendor relationship. The payment existed. The paperwork did not. Linda printed the page. That's our first significant inconsistency. Fred placed the page into a folder labeled Financial Timeline. He wasn't building a case. He was building order. Meanwhile, Ryan Cooper continued surveillance. Just after noon, he called. I've been following Jason all morning. Anything. He visited 3 offices. Business meetings? Probably. Ryan paused. Then something changed. Fred listened carefully. He drove to a warehouse district on the south side. What kind of warehouse? Document storage. Fred looked toward Linda. She continued analyzing spreadsheets while listening silently. Ryan continued. Jason stayed inside for 19 minutes. Carrying anything? He entered empty-handed and left. With 2 banker boxes, Fred wrote another note. Banker boxes. Where did he take them? To another office. Which one? Horizon. Fred sat a little straighter. The empty office. Not empty today? What changed? Lights. Cars. 3 people entered through the rear door. Ryan lowered his voice. I couldn't identify them. Were they employees? I doubt it. Why, no computers. No delivery trucks. No normal office activity. What then? They unloaded boxes. Paperwork, Fred thought. Physical records. Ryan continued. I photographed everything. Good. I'll send them. Minutes later, the images arrived. The warehouse appeared ordinary. Jason's SUV stood beside a loading entrance. 2 identical banker boxes emerged. Each carried printed labels. One label remained partially visible. Project certifications. The second label was obscured by tape. Fred enlarged the image. Nothing else could be read. Linda glanced at the photograph. They're moving documents. Looks that way. Not destroying them. No. Relocating them. She turned back to the financial software. People move records when they're preparing for something. Such as audits, lawsuits, investigations, or divorce. Fred considered that possibility. Had Natalia begun relocating documents before inviting him to dinner? The timing fit. Too well. Late that afternoon, Linda called him back to the monitor. I've finished another comparison. What did you find? She displayed 2 columns. Natalia's declared consulting income, outgoing transfers from Horizon. The dates match. Fred stared. Almost every consulting payment Natalia reported corresponded to money arriving from Horizon within 2 business days. Linda circled several entries. But here's the problem. The amounts? They don't match, Natalia reported, earning far less than Horizon transferred. Meaning, money disappeared. Into another account? Probably. Linda zoomed into another diagram. The missing funds flowed toward an institution neither of them recognized. Redwood National Trust. Fred searched his memory. I've never heard of that bank. You wouldn't. It specializes in trust administration. Private. Extremely. Linda printed another report. We're getting closer. She gathered the day's findings into a single folder. This is enough for Margaret. Is it enough for court? No. Not yet. What are we missing? She looked directly at him. The person controlling the accounts. Jason. Maybe. Natalia. Maybe. Someone else? Linda shrugged. Money follows people. We just haven't identified the right person. Fred packed the documents carefully. Every page returned to its proper place. Nothing remained loose. Nothing remained out of sequence. Before he reached the elevator, Linda stopped him. Fred. He turned. Most clients ask me one question. What question? How much money did they steal? And I didn't. No. You asked how the system worked. She smiled. That tells me you're going to win. Fred considered her words. I'm not trying to win. What are you trying to do? He answered without hesitation. I want the truth to survive. Linda watched him leave. After the elevator doors closed, she looked once more at the transaction map covering her monitor. Hundreds of financial transfers crossed the screen like the steel cables of a suspension bridge. Complicated, interconnected, engineered. And hidden among them was one account that had never appeared before that day. An account registered under a private trust. The account holder's name remained confidential. But the first incoming transfer had occurred exactly 11 years earlier, just 3 weeks, before Fred Russell married Natalia. Margaret Sullivan disliked surprises in court. She believed lawsuits were won weeks before anyone entered a courtroom. By the time Fred arrived at her office the following Monday morning, 3 thick binders waited neatly arranged across the conference table. One was labeled Financial Disclosures. The second read Asset Verification. The third simply said Timeline. Margaret pushed the third binder toward him. Look at page 12. Fred opened it. Every significant event from the past month appeared in chronological order. The anniversary dinner, the divorce petition, Emily Carter recognizing Natalia as Rebecca, the unexplained investment accounts, Ryan's surveillance photographs, Linda Foster's financial analysis. Every fact carried supporting documentation. Every document listed its source. Nothing depended on memory. Margaret folded her hands. This is how we stay ahead. Fred nodded. You organize evidence the same way I organize bridge inspections. I organize everything that way. She picked up another folder. Natalia's attorney requested an expedited divorce. I expected that. I declined. Fred looked up. You can do that. I already did. Why? Because expedited cases require both parties to agree. And we didn't. Margaret smiled slightly. We're going to make full financial disclosure mandatory. Fred understood immediately. She'll have to list every account. Exactly. And every business interest. And every source of income. What if she omits something? Margaret's expression remained calm. Then she creates a much larger problem for herself. She wasn't threatening. She was describing procedure. That was one reason Fred trusted her. She never exaggerated. Across town, Natalia received the amended court schedule less than an hour later. Ryan Cooper watched from inside an unmarked SUV parked across the street from her office building. He had no way of hearing the conversation that followed. He didn't need to. He watched body language instead. Natalia exited the building 20 minutes after opening the envelope. She wasn't walking. She was moving quickly, her phone already pressed against her ear. She spoke while crossing the sidewalk. Less than 5 minutes later, Jason Whitmore arrived. Not from inside the building. From somewhere else entirely. He parked illegally, stepped out, and met Natalia beside a small coffee shop. Neither entered. Neither ordered coffee. They stood outside talking. Jason gestured repeatedly. Natalia shook her head. Ryan lifted his camera. Click, click, click. Every gesture became another timestamp. Another record. After 11 minutes, Jason handed Natalia a slim manila envelope. She tucked it inside her handbag without opening it. Then they separated. Ryan waited another 15 minutes before following Jason instead. Jason drove west, past downtown, past the medical district. Eventually, he entered an industrial area filled with aging warehouses and self-storage facilities. Ryan remained 3 vehicles behind. Jason pulled into a fenced property operated by Metro Secure Storage. Rows of climate-controlled storage units stretched across the complex. Jason parked beside Building C. He entered Unit C-118 using a keypad. Ryan checked the time. 2:17 p.m. Jason remained inside for almost 28 minutes. When he emerged, he carried nothing. But something caught Ryan's attention. He locked the unit, then checked the padlock twice. Not once, twice. People checked locks twice when they were protecting something valuable. Ryan photographed the unit number from a distance. C-1118. He drove away only after Jason left the property. Half an hour later, Ryan sat inside a nearby diner, reviewing the photographs. He zoomed in. The storage company used electronic access. Every entry required a personalized access code, which meant someone had a digital record of every visit. Ryan smiled for the first time that afternoon. Sometimes surveillance wasn't about watching people. Sometimes it was about discovering who else had been watching them all along. That evening, Ryan met Fred and Margaret in Margaret's office. He placed several photographs across the conference table. Storage unit. Fred examined the pictures. No company logo. No markings. No clue what's inside. Ryan nodded. Not yet. Margaret adjusted her glasses. Can we subpoena access logs? Eventually. Ryan pointed toward another photograph. I also spoke with the property manager. Fred looked up. You spoke to him? Casually. What did he say? He confirmed Jason rents only 1 unit. How long? Almost 4 years. Margaret made a note. Consistent, Ryan continued. The manager also mentioned Jason visits about once every month. Always alone. Usually, but not always. Fred remained silent. Ryan placed another photograph onto the table. It showed a visitor log reflected faintly through the office window. Most names couldn't be read. One could. Rebecca Hayes. The room became quiet. Fred stared at the blurred image. The signature wasn't perfectly visible, but the printed name beside the access record was unmistakable. Rebecca Hayes. Ryan spoke softly. The manager remembered the name because he thought she was Jason's business partner. Fred looked at Margaret. So Rebecca used the storage unit. It appears so. And Rebecca disappeared 7 years ago. Margaret finished the thought. Officially. Ryan folded his arms, which suggests Rebecca never actually disappeared. Fred looked once more at the photograph. His thoughts remained measured. No anger, no triumph, only another piece fitting into place. Linda Foster called just before 8 that evening. I have another inconsistency. Fred switched the call to speaker so Margaret could hear. What did you find? I compared Natalia's draft financial disclosure with tax filings, and there are contradictions. Margaret reached for a pen. Specific ones. 3. Linda read from her notes. First, she claims not to own any interest in private companies. Second, she reports only one investment account. Third, she declares no property held through trusts. Margaret looked toward Fred. All three statements conflict with what we've already documented, Linda continued. I can't prove they're false yet. But I can prove they deserve further examination. Margaret smiled. That's enough. She thanked Linda before ending the call. Fred remained thoughtful, so delaying the divorce forced these disclosures. Exactly. And now every future statement has to match the previous ones. Margaret nodded. People who tell the truth rarely struggle with consistency. The next afternoon, Ryan returned to Metro Secure Storage. This time he wasn't watching Jason. He was watching the building itself. Just after 4 o'clock, a maintenance contractor arrived. The electronic gate malfunctioned. Vehicles backed up while employees reset the access system. Ryan noticed several workers carrying printed maintenance logs. One clipboard remained unattended for less than 30 seconds. Long enough. He walked past, pretending to answer his phone. His eyes scanned a single page. Unit C-118. Access records, Jason Whitmore. 7 visits that year, 1 additional authorized user, initials only. R.H. Ryan didn't stop walking. He didn't photograph the clipboard. He didn't touch it. He had seen enough. R.H. Rebecca Hayes. When he called Margaret that evening, his voice carried a quiet certainty. I can't prove Natalia and Rebecca are the same person. Not yet. But I can prove Rebecca is still accessing Jason's storage unit. Margaret closed her notebook. That's exactly the kind of fact we need. Not conclusions, not accusations, facts. After ending the call, Fred stood alone beside his apartment window. Below him, traffic flowed steadily along Lake Shore Drive. The city looked unchanged. Bridges carried thousands of commuters. Office lights shimmered across the skyline. Everything appeared stable. But Fred had spent his career inspecting structures that looked perfectly safe from the outside. He knew appearances could be deceptive. Sometimes the most dangerous weakness was hidden behind concrete no one thought to examine. His phone vibrated one last time before midnight. A text message from Ryan. 1 sentence. I think I know what's inside storage unit C-118. Fred read it twice. Then another message appeared. Tomorrow I'm getting close enough to find out. Ryan Cooper arrived outside Metro Secure Storage before sunrise. The parking lot remained nearly empty. A maintenance truck occupied one corner. A delivery van idled near the main office. Everything else was quiet. He parked across the street with a clear view of Building C. His camera rested on the passenger seat. A notebook lay beside it. Only observations. At 8:43 a.m., Jason Whitmore's black SUV entered through the security gate. Ryan checked his watch. Jason followed the same route as before. Building C, Unit C-118. He carried a single banker box from the vehicle. No one accompanied him. Ryan photographed every step. Jason unlocked the unit, entered, closed the door behind him. 22 minutes later, he emerged, carrying a different box. This one appeared older. Its cardboard edges had yellowed with age. A strip of faded masking tape stretched across the top. Ryan zoomed in. Only one handwritten word remained visible. Archive. Jason placed the box inside his SUV and drove away. Ryan waited another 10 minutes before leaving. He had what he needed. Not the contents, the pattern. The storage unit wasn't being used for furniture or personal belongings. It was an archive. Someone had been preserving records. An hour later, Ryan met Margaret Sullivan in her office. Fred arrived moments afterward. Ryan spread the surveillance photographs across the conference table. He removed another document box. Margaret examined the timestamps. Same unit. Same routine. No unnecessary movement. Ryan nodded. He knew exactly what he wanted. Fred looked at the enlarged photograph. The box was labeled Archive. Margaret tapped the table thoughtfully. If they're preserving records instead of destroying them, those records still exist. Ryan agreed. And if they still exist, we have a chance to recover them. Margaret opened a legal reference book, already marked with several sticky notes. There are only a few ways we gain lawful access. Search warrant, Fred asked. Not yet. We don't have probable cause for a criminal search. Ryan leaned forward. What about civil discovery? Margaret shook her head. Possible later. But not immediately. She paused. There's another option. Both men looked at her. If we demonstrate that relevant financial records may be concealed or destroyed, the court can order preservation. Fred understood. They wouldn't be allowed to dispose of anything. Exactly, Ryan smiled. That buys us time. The motion was filed that afternoon. Margaret requested an emergency preservation order covering financial records, corporate files, storage facilities, and electronic business documents connected to the pending divorce. She didn't accuse anyone of fraud. She didn't mention Rebecca Hayes. She simply argued that substantial undisclosed assets appeared to exist and that important business records required preservation until full financial disclosure could be completed. The language remained careful, measured, professional, just the way she intended. The following morning, the judge granted the temporary preservation order. It wasn't dramatic. No courtroom confrontation. No raised voices. Just a signed judicial order requiring both parties to preserve potentially relevant records. Margaret placed the signed copy on Fred's desk. This changes everything. How? If anything disappears after today, it becomes significant. Very. Fred read the order carefully. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, he felt the investigation moving from suspicion toward procedure. The law had entered the picture. Ryan returned to Metro Secure Storage later that afternoon. He wasn't there to investigate. He was there to deliver notice. A licensed process server accompanied him. The storage manager accepted the court order without argument. Ryan watched as copies were placed into the facility's records. The manager read the document twice, then looked up. So Unit C-118 is involved, Ryan answered carefully. I'm not discussing any specific tenant. The manager nodded. I understand. He lowered his voice anyway. If someone requests access logs later. Ryan waited. We'll still have them. Ryan thanked him. That single sentence mattered. Electronic records would survive. 2 days passed quietly. Too quietly. Jason never returned to the storage facility. Natalia maintained her normal work schedule. No unusual meetings appeared. No hurried phone calls. Ryan disliked silence. Experienced investigators knew that sudden calm often meant decisions were being made somewhere else. Late Friday afternoon, his phone rang. It was one of his confidential business contacts. I think you should see this. What is it? A moving truck. Where? The Horizon office. Ryan was already reaching for his car keys. The leased office near O'Hare looked different from his previous visit. Several workers loaded filing cabinets onto a commercial truck. Cardboard boxes filled the hallway. Office furniture disappeared piece by piece. Ryan photographed everything from across the street. The company was leaving, not slowly, immediately. He called Margaret. They're clearing the office. Today? Right now. Do you recognize the moving company? Ryan zoomed in with his camera. No. Independent contractor. Margaret thought for only a moment. Stay there. When that double on. I'm already documenting everything. 30 minutes later, she arrived herself. Fred followed in his own vehicle. None of them approached the movers. Instead, they watched, observed, recorded. One cabinet after another disappeared into the truck. Then something unexpected happened. A worker rolled out a locked fireproof filing cabinet on a dolly. Unlike the others, this cabinet carried a bright red evidence seal from a document destruction company. Margaret narrowed her eyes. Interesting. Fred looked at her. Why? If those records were scheduled for destruction, they shouldn't be moving them. Exactly. The movers loaded the cabinet anyway. Ryan photographed the serial number printed on its side. Every angle, every label, every timestamp, nothing escaped his lens. That evening, Margaret contacted the court. The preservation order had already been served. Removing records wasn't necessarily illegal. Destroying or concealing them could be. By Saturday morning, the judge issued a supplemental directive. No business records related to the disclosed financial entities could be destroyed, transferred beyond the court's reach, or intentionally concealed until further order. Copies of the directive reached Horizon's registered office before noon. When Ryan drove past again that afternoon, the moving truck was gone. So was most of the furniture. But one thing remained: the locked fireproof cabinet, still standing alone inside the nearly empty office. No one had touched it. Linda Foster spent the weekend reviewing another set of financial records. Late Sunday evening, she called Fred. I found something unusual. What is it? I matched payment dates against corporate filings, and Horizon wasn't the only company receiving unexplained money. Fred opened his notebook. Go ahead. 3 additional companies received transfers. She read the names aloud. Lakefront Strategic Holdings, North Harbor Development, Prairie Vista Management. Fred recognized everyone. Jason's companies? Yes, Linda continued. But all 4 companies shared something else. What? The same document mailing address. Fred wrote it down. The address looked familiar. Very familiar. He checked Ryan's surveillance photographs, then compared them with Linda's report. The addresses matched exactly. Metro Secure Storage, Building C, Mailbox 118. Not an office, not a corporate headquarters, a storage facility. The businesses weren't simply connected to the storage unit. On paper, the storage unit itself had become the mailing address for multiple companies. Fred slowly closed the notebook. The archive inside Unit C-118 was no longer just a collection of old paperwork. It appeared to be the administrative center of Jason Whitmore's entire network. And somewhere inside those boxes, someone had almost certainly preserved the answers they had been searching for since the night a waitress whispered a forgotten name. Monday morning began with a phone call from Margaret Sullivan. Can you be in my office by 9? Fred glanced at the clock. I'll be there. You'll want to hear this in person. She ended the call without another word. That alone told him the conversation mattered. Margaret never dramatized developments. If she asked someone to come in, there was a reason. Ryan Cooper arrived first. Several new folders covered the conference table. Each carried a colored tab: surveillance, corporate records, financial analysis, storage facility. Linda Foster joined them 5 minutes later, carrying a laptop and another stack of documents. Margaret closed the conference room door. We've reached a point where this investigation changes. Fred remained silent. Margaret continued. Up to now, we've been gathering evidence for a divorce. She placed one folder in the center of the table. I'm no longer convinced that's what this is. Ryan nodded. Neither am I. Linda opened her laptop. I finished tracing every available transaction connected to Horizon Civic Consulting. She projected a financial flowchart onto the wall. Colored lines stretched between accounts. Horizon, Lakefront Strategic Holdings, North Harbor Development, Prairie Vista Management, several private trusts, multiple personal accounts, and finally, payments connected to municipal construction projects. Fred studied the chart carefully. The money keeps returning. Linda pointed to several circular paths. Exactly. It leaves one company, moves through 2 or 3 others, and eventually returns under a different description. What does that accomplish? It disguises the origin. She enlarged another section. consulting fees, project management, engineering review, administrative services. The descriptions change. The destination changes. But the money often ends up in the same network. Fred looked toward Ryan. So, Horizon isn't operating like a real consulting business, Ryan answered quietly. It looks more like a clearinghouse. Margaret folded her hands, which raises another question. She looked directly at Fred. How many engineering certifications were attached to those payments? Fred spent the next hour comparing project numbers against his archived engineering records. The work demanded patience, project identification numbers, permit references, inspection dates, certification codes. One by one, they matched legitimate public infrastructure projects across Illinois. Everything appeared normal. Until he reached Project 21447, a municipal parking structure renovation completed nearly 2 years earlier. The certification number matched his records. The inspection date matched. The contractor matched. Only one document differed. The consulting approval page. His authentic project file listed no outside consultant. The version attached to Horizon's financial records included one, Horizon Civic Consulting LLC. Fred checked again, then a third time. The page had been inserted afterward. His signature appeared genuine. The surrounding document did not. He looked up. I've found another one. Linda walked over. So the consulting approval wasn't part of your original report? No. Someone added it. Ryan asked the obvious question. Could it have been an administrative correction? Fred shook his head. The formatting is wrong. The page numbering is wrong. And the document version doesn't match the department archive. Margaret wrote only one sentence. Additional altered certification identified. No conclusions. Only evidence. Ryan spread several surveillance photographs across the table. I've been reviewing everyone who entered storage unit C-118 over the past year. Fred examined the images. Jason appeared repeatedly. 2 unidentified men appeared several times. Then one photograph stopped him. Natalia. She wore sunglasses and a baseball cap. Even so, there was little doubt. Ryan slid another photograph beside it. Same day, different angle. The electronic access keypad clearly displayed the time. She entered alone. What happened afterward? Fred asked. Ryan opened another folder. The access log. He had obtained it through legal discovery after the preservation order. Every recorded entry appeared by date and time. Jason Whitmore, Jason Whitmore, Jason Whitmore, Rebecca Hayes, Rebecca Hayes, Rebecca Hayes. No Natalia Russell. Fred read the page twice. The access code belongs to Rebecca. Ryan nodded. Not Natalia. Linda looked toward Margaret. So legally? Margaret finished the thought. The storage company recognizes Rebecca Hayes as an authorized user. Silence settled over the room. The waitress hadn't mistaken Natalia for someone else. The storage records independently identified Rebecca Hayes as an active participant. Fred didn't speak. He simply added another line to his notebook. Rebecca still exists. Late that afternoon, Margaret received a response to one of her discovery requests. She read it once. Then again. This is interesting. Everyone looked toward her. The opposing attorney produced additional financial disclosures. Fred noticed her expression hadn't changed. What did they disclose? A business consulting relationship. Horizon. No. Margaret handed him the document. Silver Ridge Advisory Group. Linda immediately searched her database. No active employees. No website. No public contracts. Ryan smiled without humor. Another shell. Linda continued typing, then stopped. I found something. What? Silver Ridge shares the same registered agent as Horizon Civic Consulting. Margaret slowly closed the file. One shell company can be coincidence. Two is a pattern, Ryan added quietly, and a four becomes a network. That evening, Margaret requested another meeting. This time she invited someone new, Special Agent Mark Donovan. He arrived wearing a navy suit with no visible badge. Only after everyone sat down did he remove a leather credential wallet from his pocket. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Fred studied the identification briefly before looking back at the agent. Mark spoke calmly. I'm not here because of the divorce. I assumed that. I'm here because Ms. Sullivan asked whether the financial activity you've documented resembles matters we've investigated before. Margaret slid several binders toward him. No opinions. Just records. Mark spent nearly 20 minutes reviewing the material. No one interrupted him. Finally, he closed the last binder. You've done thorough work, Fred answered simply. I organized what I found. Mark nodded. That helped. He pointed towards the financial timeline. I can't discuss ongoing federal investigations. I understand. But I can tell you this. He paused. Corporate networks that circulate funds through inactive consulting companies while attaching altered professional certifications tend to attract federal attention. The room remained quiet. Fred asked one question. Does that mean crimes were committed? Mark answered carefully. It means enough questions exist to justify looking closer. Margaret leaned forward. If additional evidence becomes available, we'll review it. What kind of evidence? Mark looked directly at Fred. Original business records. Accounting ledgers. Internal communications. Anything establishing who directed the transactions. Ryan immediately thought of storage unit C-118, the archive, the banker boxes, the locked filing cabinet, everything pointed there. The meeting ended shortly before 7. As Fred walked toward the parking garage, Ryan caught up with him. I didn't mention something in front of everyone. What is it? Ryan handed him a printed photograph. I received this an hour ago. The image showed Jason Whitmore entering the storage facility that afternoon. Unlike every previous visit, he wasn't carrying boxes. He was carrying a portable document scanner. Fred looked at Ryan. He never brought equipment before. No. What does that suggest? Ryan answered quietly. They may be turning paper records into digital copies. Fred studied the photograph one last time. If the archive was being digitized, the timeline had changed. Someone inside Jason's organization had realized the documents were becoming important. Whether they intended to preserve them or make them disappear, Fred couldn't yet know. But for the first time since the investigation began, another agency now knew the names Jason Whitmore, Horizon Civic Consulting, and Rebecca Hayes. The search for the truth no longer belonged to Fred alone. The hearing lasted less than 10 minutes before anything unusual happened. Judge Eleanor Hayes reviewed the preliminary filings with practiced efficiency. The courtroom remained quiet. Attorneys organized binders. The court reporter adjusted her keyboard. A handful of observers sat silently in the back row, waiting for routine divorce proceedings to begin. Fred sat beside Margaret Sullivan without speaking. He had attended enough engineering contract disputes to recognize procedure. Everything moved according to schedule. Until it didn't. Margaret leaned slightly toward him. Remember, she whispered, answer only what you're asked. Fred nodded. Across the aisle, Natalia avoided looking in his direction. Her attorney organized several folders into neat stacks before standing. Your Honor, he began. The parties have already been living separately, and we believe this matter can proceed efficiently based upon the financial disclosures previously submitted. Margaret rose immediately. Your Honor, before any discussion of asset division, we respectfully request the court address significant discrepancies discovered during mandatory financial disclosure. The judge looked over her glasses. What type of discrepancies? Margaret approached the lectern. Undisclosed financial interests. She placed one binder before the judge. Previously unidentified business entities. A second binder followed. Inconsistent income reporting. Then a third, and documentary evidence suggesting that additional financial records exist which have not yet been produced. The courtroom remained silent. Natalia's attorney stood. We object to speculation. Margaret didn't react. I'm not offering speculation. She opened the first binder. I'm offering records. The judge examined several highlighted pages. These transactions were not included in the original disclosure. No, Your Honor. And you've requested supplemental production. Yes. Were those requests answered? Only partially. The judge turned another page. What is Horizon Civic Consulting? Natalia's attorney answered first. A consulting entity with minimal activity. Margaret waited until he finished. We requested supporting business records. And they have not been produced. The judge made a brief note. I'll address that shortly. Fred watched quietly. This wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was something more powerful. A careful examination of facts. Margaret called her first witness, Linda Foster. After being sworn in, Linda took the witness stand carrying only a thin folder. Margaret approached. Please state your occupation. I'm a forensic accountant. Did you review the financial records provided in this matter? I did. What was your assignment? To determine whether the reported financial information was internally consistent. Margaret nodded. What did you find? Linda spoke calmly. Multiple payment patterns that warranted additional examination. She explained how Horizon Civic Consulting received recurring deposits before transferring most of the funds to related entities within short periods. No accusations, only observations supported by bank statements. Margaret displayed a timeline on a courtroom monitor. Colored arrows connected several companies. The judge studied it carefully. Linda continued. The movement of funds was consistent over several years. Natalia's attorney stood. Objection. Foundation. Margaret immediately responded. The witness personally prepared the analysis from authenticated financial records. Overruled. Linda continued. The records alone do not establish wrongdoing. They establish that further documentation is necessary. The judge nodded slightly. Understood? Fred appreciated the precision. Every answer remained inside the evidence. Nothing reached beyond it. During a recess, Ryan Cooper entered the courtroom. He wasn't scheduled to testify. Instead, he quietly handed Margaret a sealed envelope. She opened it only after stepping into the hallway. Inside were newly certified access records from Metro Secure Storage, official copies, time-stamped, authenticated. Margaret returned to the courtroom carrying the documents. When proceedings resumed, she addressed the judge once more. Your Honor, we've received certified business records this morning. Natalia's attorney frowned. We've had no opportunity to review them. Margaret handed him a copy immediately. You do now. The judge waited patiently while both attorneys examined the documents. Several minutes passed. Finally, the judge asked, What do these records show? Margaret answered simply. Authorized access to a storage unit connected to previously undisclosed business activity. She stopped there. No embellishment, no theories. The judge turned several pages. I see repeated entries. Yes. I also see another authorized individual. Margaret nodded. So do we. The name appeared clearly on the final page. Rebecca Hayes. Fred didn't look toward Natalia. Instead, he watched the judge. Judge Hayes reread the page, then compared it with the financial disclosures. Her expression remained composed. Counsel, she said to Natalia's attorney. Why does this name not appear anywhere in your client's disclosures? The attorney hesitated. I'll need to consult with my client. You may. A brief recess followed. Fred remained seated while others left the courtroom. Margaret quietly closed her binder. That changed things. Because of the storage records. Because they're independent. She lowered her voice. They don't come from us. They come from a third-party business maintaining ordinary records. Ryan joined them. They're difficult to explain away. Fred looked toward the courtroom doors. What happens now? Margaret answered. The court decides whether additional discovery is necessary. And if it is, we gain access to far more documents, Ryan added. And people who thought they had time suddenly lose it. Proceedings resumed 20 minutes later. Judge Hayes spoke first. Having reviewed the supplemental material, the court finds that the current financial disclosures appear incomplete. She looked toward both attorneys. Accordingly, this matter will not proceed to final property division today. Natalia's attorney began to stand. The judge gently raised a hand. I'm not finished. He sat again. The court orders expanded financial discovery. She listed the requirements one by one: complete business records, corporate ownership documentation, trust information, investment account statements, storage records relevant to financial disclosures. Production deadlines were set. Failure to comply could result in sanctions. Fred listened without emotion. This wasn't victory, it was process. Exactly what Margaret had wanted from the beginning. The judge gathered her papers. This hearing is continued. The bailiff announced the recess. People slowly began leaving the courtroom. As Fred stepped into the courthouse hallway, Ryan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then immediately looked toward Margaret. What is it? She asked. Ryan handed over the phone. A message from Special Agent Mark Donovan. Only one sentence appeared. We've identified another project containing an engineering certification matching Mr. Russell's signature. Fred read the message twice. Then Ryan received a second notification. This one included only a project number. Fred recognized it instantly. It wasn't an old parking structure. It was a bridge renovation currently under construction, the same project he had inspected only 3 weeks earlier. He looked at Ryan. If that certificate isn't authentic, Ryan finished the thought, then someone is still using your name. The divorce case had just expanded, and whatever Jason Whitmore's network had been building, it hadn't stopped. The courtroom was quieter than before. Word had spread that the divorce proceedings had become something more complicated. A few additional observers occupied the back row, though the judge quickly reminded everyone that the hearing concerned financial disclosure, not public speculation. Fred took his seat beside Margaret Sullivan. Ryan Cooper sat one row behind them. Linda Foster organized several folders without saying a word. Margaret leaned toward Fred. Our next witness is important. Emily. Margaret nodded. Remember why? Not because she proves anything. Exactly. She connects independent facts. Fred understood. Emily's testimony alone would never establish fraud or hidden assets. But if her recollection matched records that had already been authenticated, another piece of the structure would fall into place. The bailiff opened the courtroom door. Emily Carter. Emily walked to the witness stand wearing a navy blazer and simple black slacks. She looked nervous, but her hands remained steady as she took the oath. Margaret approached the witness stand. Please state your name for the record. Emily Carter. Your occupation? I'm a restaurant manager. Were you working on the evening Mr. and Mrs. Russell had dinner at your restaurant? Yes. Did something unusual happen? Emily hesitated only briefly. I recognized Mrs. Russell. Margaret nodded. What name came to mind? Rebecca. Rebecca Hayes. Natalia's attorney immediately stood. Objection. The witness is assuming identity. Margaret remained calm. I'm asking what she recognized. Judge Hayes looked toward Emily. You may answer, Emily continued. I believed I recognized her as Rebecca Hayes. Margaret asked her next question carefully. Why? Emily took a slow breath. I knew Rebecca years ago. Where? In Milwaukee. What was your relationship? We worked in neighboring businesses. How often did you see her? Several times a week. For how long? Almost 2 years. Margaret allowed the answer to settle before continuing. Why were you confident enough to speak her name that evening? Emily looked toward the judge rather than Natalia. It wasn't only her face. What else? The small scar above her left eyebrow. She paused. And the way she smiled only with one side of her mouth. Margaret nodded. Anything else? When she reached for her wine glass, Emily demonstrated them. She always turned the glass slightly before lifting it. Fred remembered the dinner. Natalia had done exactly that. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Now another independent observation joined the record. Cross-examination began. Natalia's attorney approached slowly. Ms. Carter, how many years had passed since you last saw Rebecca Hayes? About 7. 7 years. Yes? So your memory could be mistaken. It could. You aren't claiming memories are perfect. No. The attorney smiled slightly. People change hairstyles. Yes? They gain or lose weight. Yes. They age. Yes. So it's possible you simply confused one woman for another. Emily answered honestly. It's possible. The attorney seemed encouraged. But that's not what I believe happened. He stopped pacing. Why not? Because I didn't recognize only her appearance. Emily looked directly at him. I recognized habits. What habits? The way she thanked me. The attorney frowned. What do you mean? Years ago, Rebecca always said, I appreciate it, instead of thank you. Emily folded her hands. Mrs. Russell said the exact same words before I brought dessert. The attorney glanced at his notes. No further questions. Margaret stood again. One final question. Emily nodded. When you recognized Mrs. Russell, were you trying to accuse her of anything? No. Were you involved in this lawsuit? No. Did you know either party before that evening? No. So why speak at all? Emily answered quietly. Because I honestly thought I had just recognized someone I used to know. Margaret smiled faintly. Thank you. Emily stepped down from the witness stand. Fred watched her leave the courtroom. She had never exaggerated. She had admitted uncertainty where uncertainty existed. That honesty made every confident statement more credible. The judge reviewed her notes before speaking. The court considers the witness credible. She looked toward both attorneys. Her testimony does not establish legal identity. Natalia's attorney nodded. But, the judge continued, it does establish a reasonable basis for further inquiry when considered alongside the documentary evidence already submitted. Margaret wrote one sentence in her notebook. Independent corroboration accepted. Ryan became the next witness. Unlike Emily, he testified only about records. No opinions, no theories. He described the surveillance, the storage facility, the certified access logs, the photographs. Every answer referred to dates, times, and authenticated documents. Margaret displayed one enlarged exhibit, the electronic access record, Unit C-118, authorized user Rebecca Hayes. She asked only one question. Mr. Cooper, who prepared these records. The storage facility. Did you alter them? No. Did your investigation create them? No. They existed before I requested certified copies. Margaret nodded. No further questions. The testimony lasted less than 20 minutes. Its significance was much greater. Unlike surveillance photographs, the access logs had been created automatically in the ordinary course of business. After lunch, Linda Foster returned briefly to explain another financial comparison. She projected a simple timeline. On one side appeared dates when Rebecca Hayes accessed the storage unit. On the other side appeared transfers involving Horizon Civic Consulting. The patterns did not prove causation, but several dates aligned within 24 hours. Judge Hayes examined the chart carefully. "You are not stating these events caused one another?" "No, Your Honor." "1. I'm stating they occurred in close sequence, often enough to justify examining the underlying business records." The judge nodded. "Understood?" Fred appreciated Linda's precision. She never reached beyond what the numbers supported. As the afternoon session neared its end, Margaret requested permission to introduce one final exhibit: a sealed envelope. Judge Hayes opened it personally. Inside was a certified copy of a historical driver's license photograph issued in Wisconsin. Rebecca Hayes. The image was placed beside a recent public photograph of Natalia Russell. No witness was asked to declare they were the same person. No dramatic accusation followed. Instead, Margaret simply said, "Your Honor, we ask only that this exhibit be preserved as part of the record, pending further identification through appropriate legal procedures." The judge agreed. So ordered. The photograph became another documented piece of evidence. Nothing more, nothing less. As the courtroom emptied, Special Agent Mark Donovan quietly approached Margaret. He spoke softly enough that only Fred and Ryan could hear. "The preservation order worked." Margaret looked at him. "What happened?" "We've confirmed that no records were removed from storage unit C-118 after the court order took effect." Ryan let out a slow breath. "So the archive is still intact?" Mark nodded. "And we're very close to obtaining lawful access." Fred looked back toward the now empty witness stand. The hearing had produced no dramatic confession, no emotional confrontation, only something far more valuable. Every independent witness had strengthened the same framework: Emily's memory, Ryan's records, Linda's analysis. Each stood on its own. Together they formed a structure that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. As they walked toward the courthouse exit, Mark's phone vibrated. He read the message once before looking at Margaret. The document examiner just finished the first comparison. Fred stopped walking. "And?" Mark folded the phone closed. "The signature isn't the only thing that was copied." He met Fred's eyes. "They copied your engineering seal, too." The forensic report arrived on a Wednesday morning. It was only 34 pages long. No dramatic language, no bold conclusions, only measurements, comparisons, microscopic photographs. Fred read every page before meeting Margaret Sullivan. The document examiner had compared his authenticated engineering seal with the seal appearing on 7 disputed certification packages. The report identified identical imperfections: a tiny nick along the outer ring, a faint scratch crossing the state emblem, a microscopic ink defect that appeared in precisely the same location each time. The examiner's conclusion remained cautious. The questioned seals had not been created independently. They had been reproduced from an authentic source. Fred closed the report. Someone hadn't merely copied his signature, they had duplicated the entire certification process. Margaret assembled everyone in her conference room: Ryan Cooper, Linda Foster, Special Agent Mark Donovan. No one spoke until Fred placed the forensic report in the center of the table. Mark read the final page twice. "This changes the investigation." Margaret looked at him. "How?" "Before today, we suspected altered documents." He tapped the report. "Now we have evidence that authentic professional credentials were systematically reproduced." Linda folded her hands. "The financial records already suggested organization." Ryan nodded. "This confirms it." Margaret turned toward Fred. I need you to understand something. I'm listening. This report doesn't accuse anyone. I know. It identifies a process. Fred appreciated that distinction. Facts first, people later. Ryan stood and walked to the whiteboard. For weeks, photographs and notes had accumulated there. Jason Whitmore, Rebecca Hayes, Horizon Civic Consulting, the storage unit, corporate entities. He drew a line connecting each item, then another. What bothered me from the beginning, Ryan said, was that everything pointed toward paperwork. He circled Horizon. No employees. He circled the storage facility. No operating office. He circled the financial timeline. Money moved. He stepped back. But none of these explain who assembled the certification packages. Mark studied the board. They had access to engineering documents. Linda did, and financial records. Margaret finished the thought. And someone capable of coordinating both. Silence settled across the room. Fred looked at the board. Every connection existed because independent evidence supported it. None depended upon assumptions. The structure was finally becoming visible. That afternoon, Ryan received permission to review additional records preserved under the court's discovery order. The storage company produced inventory logs associated with Unit C-118, not the contents. Only descriptions entered when boxes had been delivered. Most entries were vague. Project files, accounting, corporate records. One description stopped Ryan immediately. Engineering templates. He requested a certified copy of the inventory sheet. The manager handed it over. That's everything we're authorized to release. Ryan thanked him. As he reached the parking lot, he photographed the document before placing it inside an evidence folder. The words remained ordinary, yet they answered an important question. The archive had not stored finished projects alone. It contained templates. Someone had preserved materials capable of creating additional certifications. Meanwhile, Linda continued tracing financial transactions. She called Fred just before 5. I found another pattern. What is it? I compared payment dates with project completion dates. And the consulting fees usually appeared after engineering certifications were issued. Fred opened his notebook. How long afterward? Between 3 and 6 weeks. Consistently. Remarkably so. Linda emailed a spreadsheet. Every row followed the same sequence. Project completed. Certification issued. Consulting payment. Transfer through Horizon. Distribution to related companies. Fred stared at the timeline. It resembled an assembly line. Not random. Engineered. Later that evening, Margaret received notice that the court had granted another discovery request. This time, the order required production of original corporate governance documents for Horizon Civic Consulting and its affiliated entities. She immediately called Ryan. If they comply, we'll know who officially managed the companies. And if they don't, the court will notice. Ryan smiled. Either outcome tells us something. The requested records arrived 2 days later. Several binders, articles of organization, annual reports, registered agent filings, operating agreements. Fred helped organize them by date. Linda reviewed ownership sections. Ryan examined signatures. Margaret compared disclosures. Nothing appeared extraordinary, until Linda reached the operating agreement for Horizon Civic Consulting. She frowned. What is it? She pointed toward a paragraph listing individuals authorized to approve consulting engagements. Jason Whitmore appeared first. That was expected. A second name followed, Rebecca Hayes. Fred looked toward Ryan. The same Rebecca. Ryan nodded. The spelling matches every other record. Margaret read the page carefully. Interesting. What? The document identifies Rebecca as Director of Operations. Linda looked through several additional filings. The title appears repeatedly. So Rebecca wasn't a passive investor. No. She held authority. Mark, who had joined by video conference, spoke from the monitor. Authority creates responsibility. No one disagreed. Fred returned home carrying copies of the newly produced records. The apartment remained quiet. Boxes still occupied one side of the bedroom where Natalia had removed many of her belongings weeks earlier. He sat at the dining table beneath the same light where the investigation had begun. One notebook, one word: Rebecca. Now that single word filled several folders: corporate records, financial timelines, access logs, operating agreements. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why had Natalia invited him to dinner before filing for divorce? If the business network had operated for years, why choose that particular evening? He reviewed the calendar: anniversary dinner, divorce papers, Emily's recognition. Everything changed within minutes. He wrote another note: timing matters. Then he closed the notebook. The following Monday, Special Agent Mark Donovan requested another meeting. He placed a sealed envelope on the conference table. These came from an independent laboratory. Margaret opened it carefully. Inside was the completed examination of several disputed engineering certifications. She read silently, then handed the report to Fred. Only one sentence had been highlighted. The questioned documents originated from at least 2 separate production batches. Fred looked up. "What does that mean?" Mark answered. "It means the certifications weren't created during one isolated incident." Ryan understood immediately. "They were produced more than once," Linda added quietly, "which means the system continued operating over time." Mark nodded. "Exactly." The investigation had crossed another threshold. They were no longer looking at a single forged document. They were looking at a sustained process. As everyone gathered their files, Ryan's phone vibrated. A new message appeared from one of his field contacts. He read it once before looking at Margaret. "The courier just confirmed delivery." "Delivery of what?" Ryan slid the phone across the table. A photograph filled the screen. A sealed banker box had arrived at Horizon's attorney's office that morning. A shipping label remained visible. "Original project files do not copy." Fred studied the image carefully. If those files truly were originals, they might finally answer the question that had remained unresolved from the beginning: who had assembled the certification packages, and who had ordered them to be created? The courtroom felt different. Not louder, not more crowded. More deliberate. Every person present understood that the hearing had moved beyond incomplete financial disclosures. Months of records testimony and forensic analysis had narrowed the dispute into a series of specific questions supported by authenticated documents. Judge Eleanor Hayes entered promptly at 9. Everyone stood. The proceedings began without ceremony. Margaret Sullivan rose first. "Your Honor, the parties have now completed the additional discovery ordered by the court." She placed 2 final binders before the clerk. These contain the remaining corporate governance documents, certified banking records, and the forensic examination requested during the previous hearing. The judge nodded. "I've reviewed the preliminary submissions." She turned toward Natalia's attorney. "Has your client supplemented her financial disclosures?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Were all requested business interests disclosed?" "We believe so." Margaret remained silent until the judge acknowledged her. "Miss Sullivan?" "We respectfully disagree." She opened the first binder. "The updated disclosure still omits Horizon Civic Consulting's operating authority held by Rebecca Hayes. She displayed the certified operating agreement already admitted into evidence. No interpretation is required." She pointed to the highlighted paragraph. "The document identifies Rebecca Hayes as Director of Operations." The judge compared it with Natalia's amended disclosure. "No such position appears here." "Correct, Your Honor." Natalia's attorney stood. "Our position remains that Rebecca Hayes and Mrs. Russell have not been legally established as the same individual." Margaret nodded. "We are not asking the court to make that finding today." "What are you asking?" "That the court recognize the financial disclosures remain incomplete in light of authenticated corporate records. The distinction mattered. Judge Hayes wrote several notes before speaking. The court is concerned with disclosure. She looked toward Natalia's attorney. Not assumptions. He acknowledged the point. Linda Foster became the first witness of the morning. Margaret kept her examination brief. Miss Foster, did you complete your review of the financial network? I did. What did you determine? Linda displayed an updated transaction map. Unlike earlier versions, this one included only verified transfers supported by bank records. The funds consistently followed the same sequence. She traced the path with a pointer. Project-related payment, Horizon Civic Consulting, affiliated entities, private trust, distribution. She paused. The pattern repeated over multiple years. Margaret asked one final question. Did the amended financial disclosure account for every transaction you identified? No. How many remain unexplained? 12. The courtroom remained silent. Natalia's attorney declined an extended cross-examination. Instead, he asked only one question. Can your analysis identify who personally authorized those transfers? No, Linda answered without hesitation. The records identify transactions. They do not identify intent. No further questions. Fred appreciated her restraint. She had never attempted to prove more than the documents allowed. Ryan Cooper testified next. He summarized the preservation of the storage records, the inventory logs, the surveillance timeline, the certified access reports. Margaret projected one exhibit onto the courtroom monitor, a chronological comparison. Rebecca Hayes appeared repeatedly as an authorized user. The records originated from different businesses, different dates, different custodians, yet they consistently referenced the same name. Ryan concluded his testimony with one observation. The value of these records is not that they agree with my investigation. He looked toward the judge. The value is that they existed before my investigation began. Judge Hayes nodded slowly. Understood. Following the lunch recess, Special Agent Mark Donovan entered the courtroom. He wasn't called to accuse anyone. He testified only about document examination. The engineering certifications submitted for review were analyzed by an independent forensic laboratory. Margaret approached. What did the examination determine? The questioned engineering seals originated from reproductions of authentic source material. Did the laboratory identify multiple production batches? Yes. What does that indicate? Mark answered carefully. That the questioned certifications were not produced during a single isolated event. Natalia's attorney objected. Calls for speculation. Margaret responded immediately. The witness is explaining the laboratory's terminology. The judge allowed the answer. Mark continued. The laboratory's conclusion is limited. It identifies multiple production events. It does not identify who created them. Again, no one reached beyond the evidence. The afternoon turned toward closing arguments regarding discovery and financial disclosure. Margaret spoke first. This case began as a routine divorce. She glanced briefly toward Fred before continuing. It became something else because independent records repeatedly revealed information omitted from mandatory disclosures. She referenced only admitted evidence, corporate documents, financial timelines, storage records, forensic analysis. No single exhibit resolves every question, she acknowledged. But together, they establish a consistent pattern requiring complete transparency before marital assets can be divided. She returned to counsel table. Natalia's attorney stood. He argued that many questions remained unresolved, that identity had not been conclusively established, that several inferences invited by the evidence extended beyond the documents themselves. When he finished, Judge Hayes remained silent for several moments. Then she began reading from prepared notes. The court agrees that certain ultimate questions remain unanswered. She looked toward both parties. However, the court also finds repeated deficiencies in the financial disclosures previously submitted, she continued. The authenticated records introduced during these proceedings established that additional business relationships and financial activity existed beyond those initially disclosed. The courtroom listened without interruption. Accordingly, the court orders supplemental disclosure under oath within 14 days. She paused. Failure to comply may result in appropriate sanctions permitted by law. Fred did not celebrate. Margaret simply closed her binder. The order represented another step, not the finish. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited near the entrance. Neither Fred nor Margaret stopped. Ryan walked a short distance behind them. Only after reaching the parking garage did Mark Donovan catch up. I wanted to tell you before you heard it elsewhere. Margaret looked at him. What happened? The laboratory completed one final comparison. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a short memorandum. The questioned engineering packages shared identical formatting characteristics with documents recovered from Horizon's archived project templates. Ryan looked up. So, the templates match. Mark nodded. The formatting does. The laboratory cannot identify who assembled the files, but it can confirm they came from the same production system. Margaret carefully returned the memorandum to its envelope. That matters. It does. That evening, Fred returned to the apartment one last time before the remaining property inventory scheduled by the court. The rooms felt emptier than ever. He walked through each space slowly. The living room, the kitchen, the balcony overlooking the city. Nothing looked dramatic, only finished. He opened the drawer where he had kept his leather notebook since the anniversary dinner. The first page contained a single handwritten word: Rebecca. He turned through the remaining pages. Each entry had been another observation, another verified fact, another question answered. He closed the notebook gently. For weeks he had believed the investigation was about discovering what had happened. Now he realized something different. It had always been about preserving the truth before assumptions buried it. His phone vibrated. A message from Margaret. One sentence. The final hearing has been scheduled. Fred read it once, then looked out across the Chicago skyline. Tomorrow would not be about uncovering another hidden document. It would be about bringing every verified fact together into one complete picture. The investigation was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The final hearing began under clear skies. No reporters crowded the entrance. No unexpected witnesses waited in the hallway. Everything that needed to be said had already been preserved in sworn testimony, certified records, and authenticated documents. Now it was time to bring those pieces together. Judge Eleanor Hayes entered the courtroom precisely at 9. Everyone stood. She took her seat and looked over the assembled binders. I have reviewed the supplemental disclosures ordered by this court. Her voice remained steady. The record is complete. Margaret Sullivan nodded once. Fred sat quietly beside her. He felt no anticipation, only relief. The waiting was almost over. Margaret delivered her final presentation without theatrics. She projected a single timeline onto the courtroom screen. No dramatic graphics. Only dates, documents, evidence numbers. The court asked for complete disclosure. She pointed to the first entry. The original financial affidavit, then the second. The amended disclosure, then the third. The certified corporate records. She continued through every major exhibit: the storage access logs, the operating agreements, the forensic accounting analysis, the document examination. Each item had already been admitted. Nothing new was introduced, nothing exaggerated. She stopped at the final page. This timeline does not answer every question surrounding the larger investigation. She looked towards the judge. It was never required to. She paused. It establishes only what the evidence supports. That significant financial interests and business relationships existed beyond those originally disclosed. She returned to counsel table. Her job was finished. Natalia's attorney rose slowly. He did not attempt to challenge the forensic reports. He did not dispute the certified corporate filings. Instead, he argued that many events surrounding Horizon Civic Consulting remained the subject of separate investigations. Judge Hayes agreed. They are. She looked down at her notes. This court is not deciding criminal liability. She looked toward both parties. It is deciding whether complete financial disclosure occurred during these proceedings. The distinction had guided every hearing. It guided this one as well. Linda Foster remained in the gallery. Ryan Cooper sat beside her. Neither would testify again. Their work already spoke through the record. Ryan leaned toward Linda. "We're done." She smiled faintly. "No. We're finished collecting evidence. The documents will keep speaking long after today." He nodded. She was right. Good investigations ended with records, not opinions. Judge Hayes began reading her decision. The courtroom became completely still. The court finds that the initial disclosures submitted during these proceedings were materially incomplete. She cited the operating agreements, the banking records, the supplemental filings, the authenticated exhibits. Each finding referenced a specific exhibit number. Never speculation, always evidence. She continued. The court therefore adopts the amended financial inventory, including the additional business interests disclosed pursuant to prior orders. Another page turned. The marital estate shall be divided using the corrected financial record. Fred listened carefully. The decision was practical, measured. It avoided sweeping conclusions, exactly as he had hoped. Then the judge addressed one final issue. The court further notes that questions relating to allegedly altered engineering certifications remain outside the scope of this dissolution proceeding. She looked toward Mark Donovan, seated quietly near the back. Those matters remain with the appropriate authorities. Mark acknowledged the statement with a slight nod. The hearing concluded less than an hour later. No applause, no celebration, only the sound of binders closing. Margaret extended her hand. "It's over." Fred shook it. "Thank you. You did the hard part. I only answered questions. You kept answering them with facts." She smiled. That made all the difference. Outside the courthouse, the summer air felt lighter. Ryan joined them on the steps. "I brought something." He handed Fred the first page of the notebook scan Ryan had made months earlier. One word appeared across the page. "Rebecca?" Ryan laughed softly. "You remember writing that?" "I do." It looked insignificant. Fred studied the page. It wasn't. It was simply the first unanswered question. Ryan folded the copy and returned it to him. Every investigation starts somewhere. Several months later, life had settled into a quieter rhythm. Fred was back inspecting bridge rehabilitation projects for the Illinois Department of Transportation, steel, concrete, load calculations, things that behaved according to measurable rules. His professional record had been formally reviewed. Every legitimate certification bearing his name had been verified. The copied documents had been separated from the authentic ones. His reputation remained intact. That mattered more than he had expected. One evening, after finishing an inspection downtown, Fred found himself walking past the same restaurant. He stopped. For a moment, he considered continuing down the sidewalk. Instead, he walked inside. Emily Carter recognized him immediately. Her face brightened. "Good to see you again?" "You too." She poured him a glass of water before asking, "Meeting someone?" Fred looked around the dining room. It felt smaller than he remembered. "No." He smiled. "Just dinner." Emily nodded. I'm glad. She left him with the menu. There were no divorce papers waiting beneath it, no hidden conversations, no unexpected revelations. Just another ordinary evening. For the first time in many months, ordinary felt extraordinary. As Fred finished dinner, he opened the leather notebook one last time. Most pages were filled with dates, names, evidence, questions. On the final blank page, he wrote a single sentence. Truth doesn't become stronger because people believe it. It becomes stronger because it can be proven. He closed the notebook, placed it back into his briefcase, and walked out into the Chicago evening. The investigation had ended. The marriage had ended. But the values that had carried him through both remained unchanged. Patience, integrity, and the quiet confidence that given enough time, facts have a way of finding the light. Every great story eventually comes down to one simple question. Who are you when no one is watching? Fred never won because he was stronger, louder, or more powerful than the people who deceived him. He prevailed because he refused to let anger replace integrity. When everything around him became uncertain, he chose patience over revenge, facts over assumptions, and truth over convenience. That choice didn't erase his pain, but it gave him something far more valuable: peace of mind. Life has a way of testing us in unexpected moments. Sometimes the people we trust the most become the ones who hurt us the deepest. Sometimes a single conversation can change the course of our lives forever. But even then, we always have a choice. We can allow bitterness to define us, or we can let adversity reveal the strength of our character. The truth may take time to surface, and justice may not arrive as quickly as we hope, but honesty has a remarkable endurance. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth simply waits to be discovered. If this story leaves you with one lesson, let it be this: protect your integrity at all costs. Your reputation, your character, and your principles are worth far more than any temporary victory. In the end, those are the things that remain when everything else falls away. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect on your own life, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when the truth changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. We read every one of them. And if you enjoy powerful stories about resilience, justice, and the strength of the human spirit, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next inspiring story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.